Hello, everyone. I'm Laurel Staples, and today we're talking about a new lawsuit filed by Blackfeet tribal members over several executive orders by President Trump. And Montana Free Press reporter Nora Mabie has a new story out on this and joins me today via Zoom to talk about the lawsuit and what it could mean going forward. And Nora, it's so good to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, first, walk me through the basics of this lawsuit and those behind it.
This lawsuit is brought by two members of the Blackfeet Nation. One is State Senator Susan Weber. She's a Democrat from Browning. And the other plaintiff is Jonathan St. Gador, and he's a rancher on the Blackfeet Reservation. They are being represented by attorney Monica Tranel, who, of course, ran twice for one of Montana's congressional seats. And in this lawsuit, they allege that the Trump administration's tariffs on Canada violate both the Constitution and their tribal treaty rights.
Okay. And speaking of tariffs, a lot going on with that, with President Trump putting a pause on tariffs. Does that in any way impact this case?
So, to my knowledge, the recent pause on tariffs does not impact this lawsuit because the pause didn't include the tariffs on Canada. There's still a 25% tariff on Canada as of today. So, my understanding is the lawsuit will go forward.
Okay. So, those filing this lawsuit, how has the tariffs impacted them?
Yes, they argue that the tariffs have already caused harm to them. Jonathan St. Gador, one of the plaintiffs, he is a rancher, and when part on his tractor broke in March, he crossed the border into Canada to buy a new part. He said he couldn't find one any closer in Montana. So when he was bringing the part back over the border, he said he had to pay a $308 tariff on the piece. And I think the part in total was about $1,200. So he said, the tariffs have already caused him harm. And they both in the lawsuit argue that if continued, they'll cause the community irreparable harm.
Okay. And then this lawsuit also takes issue with another executive order. Like you said, there were several, but this one is the flow of illicit drugs across the border. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so to implement some of these tariffs, Trump invoked what's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And so he, in his executive order, he basically expanded a state of emergency regarding the flow of fentanyl across the US-Canada border. The plaintiffs argue that, it's not at an emergency level. And basically, one of their arguments in this lawsuit is that the Trump administration did not have the legal authority to invoke this emergency act. They also are alleging, that it's the role of Congress, not the president, to regulate trade. So that's one of their other claims in why they say this violates the Constitution.
And there's a greater meaning here behind this lawsuit, right? You write in your article, it's an example of tribes flexing sovereign status to oppose new federal policies. So tell me more.
Yeah, so more and more as we see the current administration issue federal funding cuts across the board, we're seeing tribes, which have a very unique government-to-government relationship with the United States, use their sovereignty and this unique status to push back. So in March, there were 3 tribes, along with some students, who sued the Department of Interior, challenging mass layoffs within Bureau of Indian Education run schools. And so that's one, kind of high profile example where we're seeing tribes push back against these cuts. And it's interesting, now to see Montana join in that effort.
Okay. Could we see this lawsuit set a precedent?
Yeah, I think this lawsuit could certainly have some big national consequences. There's actually another one that's pretty similar. It doesn't invoke treaty rights, but it was brought by a nonprofit group that has some pretty major conservative backers. And basically they're saying Trump's tariffs on China were unconstitutional, and they're citing some of the same reasons, talking about that emergency act and other things that this lawsuit brought up too.
Okay. And I see in your article that the lawsuit says the tariffs also violate the J Treaty, right?
Yeah, so that's what I think makes this lawsuit really unique because it invokes some treaty rights that they say are being violated. So the Jay Treaty was signed in 1794 between the US and Great Britain. And at the time, it really had mostly to do with those two countries. It was meant to ease tensions amid the Revolutionary War. But it also included several things, relating to Native Americans. One of those things was it allows Native Americans to freely cross over the US-Canada border. That's something that people do today a lot. Jonathan St. Goddard, I believe, did that when he was purchasing that new tractor part. And then it also stipulates that, tribal members have the ability to cross freely without paying duties or taxes on their goods. So that's specifically what the plaintiffs mentioned in this lawsuit, saying that, if you're adding these tariffs, it's a violation of this very long-standing treaty.
What's the other side saying in response?
So I reached out to representatives from the Department of Homeland Security, and they maintain that the tariffs, are a step toward eliminating deficit in the U.S. and that they're a good thing. They didn't comment on the constitutionality of the case, or specifics of the case, which is pretty common. Oftentimes people don't give comments on specifics of lawsuits.
Okay. What's next for this lawsuit? Where is it in the process?
So I expect we'll see a response from the defendants in 60 days. So I'll be watching for that. And then after that, I'll be watching for what a judge ends up doing. But that is a little more unpredictable timing wise.
Okay. And what was it like for you to research and put this story together and the key takeaways for you?
For me, I think the biggest thing was seeing Montana and the Blackfeet tribe really enter this national conversation about pushing back against some of these federal orders. So, like I said, we've seen it with other tribes across the country. It's a movement that's sort of gaining momentum, and so to see the Blackfeet step into that was really interesting. Another unique piece of this, which I think is interesting coming from the Blackfeet, the Blackfeet Nation in Montana is part of the greater Blackfoot Confederacy. And so the Confederacy consists of 4 tribes that are similar linguistically. One is in Montana, and then 3 are across the border in Canada. So, it's very unique. They have a unique situation. People are constantly crossing the border for cultural things, for relatives, for anything. And so I'm interested to see how that plays out in this suit too.
All right. Do you anticipate other lawsuits like this?
I do. When I was reading about, the lawsuit I mentioned that was challenging the China tariffs, I think that was the first one to be filed against any of Trump's tariffs. And in the stories I read about that, they all said, we're expecting more lawsuits from these. Now that we, had that pause on a bunch of tariffs, we'll see if that slows things down. But from what I've read, it seems like it's expected that there will be more.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to share in regards to this lawsuit?
Um, I did see Senator Weber sharing on social media, giving an update to her constituents about what she was doing and why. And from what I saw, it seemed like she had a lot of support from people who live on the reservation, and other Montanans. So, I found that to be pretty interesting that people were engaged with this. And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Could this be something that ultimately goes to the Supreme Court?
I think it could. It does seem like, tribal lawsuits or lawsuits brought by tribal entities are really interesting because they often have that ability to be elevated to the highest court, especially because they have to do with these generations old treaties and things like that. So I could see it happening. We'll see what
All
happens.
right. Absolutely. Well, we'll continue to follow along with your reports. And again, Nora Mabie with a new report out by the Montana Free Press. Thank you so much, Nora, for walking us through this. And again, we look forward to that next report.
Thanks, Laura.